everyone, and welcome to Small Town Big Business, a podcast about doing big business in small towns. I'm your co-host for today, Deb Barnett, and I'm also the Executive Director for Southern Illinois Now, where we focus on economic development in the 17 southernmost counties in Illinois.
And I'm Russ Williams. I'm Director of Ethos, Small Business Incubator, Co-working Spaces, Training and Development here at the Citadel Building on Tower Square Plaza in Marion, Illinois. We want to thank you for joining us, and we want to thank our sponsors. Couldn't make this possible 100 plus episodes without our sponsors. So thanks to Arcadia Wealth Group, Banterra Bank, Black Diamond Harley Davidson and RV, Fowler Heating and Cooling, Southern Illinois Now, the Swinford Media Group, Union Street Arts, and of course the Watermark Auto Group Foundation.
All right, so today we want to welcome Noah Fulk with EWagers. So first of all, Noah, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, and so we'll dive into what EWagers is, and we have so many questions for you today about the company, but let's start with you and how you're connected to Southern Illinois.
Yeah, so I've been Southern Illinois native basically my whole life. Was born up in Chicago, but quickly moved down here very, very young age. I mean, I went to Presbyterian Church in pre-K, went to Unity Point K through 8th grade. And then
Unity Point is over in Carbondale, just down the road, for those who might not be familiar.
Yep. Unity Point Trojans. I think they're still the Trojans anyway. And then later progressed to CCHS, Carbondale Community High School, stuck around, attended SIU for a few years. And yeah, I now live and reside in Carbondale, lived in Savannah, Georgia for a few years, moved to Seattle for a few years, but ultimately ended up moving back home.
Yep.
So what brought you back to Southern Illinois?
Honestly, just the small town community vibe. Honestly, Savannah was beautiful, a lot to do, very culturally diverse, similar to Carbondale, obviously with the college being so close. But it was very touristy, very busy, hustle bustle. It was hard to just, kind of settle down and be able to breathe, right? Mm-hmm. Like if we want to go to dinner on a Friday night, we're going 20, 30 minutes early to get parking. You don't have that problem in Southern Illinois.
Right.
So it was something both my now wife, she wasn't my wife then, but, we both wanted that. And so ultimately for us, Carbondale, was a good fit.
Mm-hmm. And you knew what you had in Southern Illinois because you'd already experienced it growing up. So I think we see a lot of folks that do that. Then they travel kind of around the country and they realize really what they had to begin with.
Absolutely.
And really liked it.
Yeah. So beyond high school, education training in a certain field?
Yeah, so attended SIU as a finance major, actually ended up dropping out. And then piggyback now more so off my wife because she completed her degree. So she helps me out in the Excels and the spreadsheets and, some accounting questions. But yeah, just had a business opportunity and, it was pretty unique at the time and just had to pursue that.
And tell us about that.
Yeah, so that is EWagers. So EWagers is a B2B business infrastructure providing skill-based wagers and tournaments to businesses, and we allow them to monetize their existing audience through real money gaming in a safe, secure, compliant manner.
So break that down. Tell us what that means.
What does that mean?
Step by step,
what does that
slow.
mean? Yes. So B2B, first of all. So don't assume that people know. Tell them what
don't
B2B
assume
is.
That we know anything.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So strictly business to business. So we work with established game publishers, games, sporting venues. Easy analogy would be like imagine Candy Crush, but for money.
Okay.
Right, so you can play, and the high scores for the week or the day or even the month, whatever it may be, the top 20, top 10 highest scores receive a payout. And so everybody pays an entry fee that goes into a pool, and then we take a service fee for that, providing that safe, secure service. And then the winners get their money, and then we share that service fee with the businesses.
And it's all skill-based. Correct?
Correct. All skill-based.
Because I know we've had these conversations a lot, and just for the listeners going back with Noah and I in our relationship, so I met you for the first time over in Carbondale at SIU's Business Incubator, similar to Ethos and some of the work that they do and co-working spaces and things of that nature, but kind of kicked off EWagers there in many ways. And one of the conversations we often had, especially as you were getting started, is the compliance piece, and is this gambling? Is this like, where does this fit? So let's break that down for us. The skills based. I mean, don't give us the nutshell version, because I know we had many conversations.
Yeah, and I had to learn that too, also from just my attorneys. They were like, term gambling and skill based is different, and betting is different terminology, and everything is different. That a lot of people use them transferably, but they actually have different legal meanings. So again, we're not a sports book, we're not a DraftKings, we're not an MGM, we're not a casino. All the games have an inherent form of skill that basically gives you an advantage to winning the outcome. So in our case, we're focused on esports or video games. So the game knowledge, the mechanics, that gameplay, all of this is a skill that gives you an advantage over other players. The great thing for us is we realize that technology is quite powerful, and skill actually applies to almost anything. So legality-wise, it's in our favor, right? We actually figured out you can make bingo skill-based, believe it or not. And this was a shocker to me. One of my advisory board members stumped me on it. He's like, tell me, how do you make bingo skill-based? I'm like, you can't. He's like, well, give everybody the same panels, and whoever says bingo first has a faster reaction time, a skill that can be improved upon.
Interesting.
So we can apply this to sporting venues, mini golf, pickleball, you name it. All these sports are skill-based. Nobody would argue against that.
Right.
And we can allow these sporting venues to now monetize for real money tournaments, peer-to-peer wagering, whatever it may be. And so it boosts engagement, increases retention, and ultimately allows for the users themselves to, monetize their skills. If you're spending all this time, effort, energy, getting really good practicing something, you should make some money at it, I think. Which is ultimately why I wanted to create EWagers. I was pretty big into esports and gaming and got competitive, and fast forward, I was still pretty competitive. I was like, I think everybody should be able to do this.
Absolutely.
Now, the business opportunity, I think you said earlier, it was presented to you, but it really was a business that was presented, or you devised and created? Well,
I would say I more devised and created. Conceptually had the idea while attending, and I called my now CTO, good friend Kevin's son, and mentioned the idea. He was a computer science major in Seattle at WashU, and I was like, is this possible? Could we do it? And he's like, yeah, it's definitely possible. And he's like, if you think it's something you want to do, he's like, I might get involved with you at some point, which is actually whenever I moved out to Seattle, because I was like.
So as a side note, and I didn't know this was going to come up, but I'm on the board for the local Boys and Girls Club of Southern Illinois, and we have an esports program at Carbondale High School. We were awarded a grant that I believe came from the Atlanta Boys and Girls Club or from the national offices, and we've had it for almost a year now with an advisor who's a teacher at Carbondale, and I believe there's 40 to 50 students that are enrolled just in that high school program through the Boys and Girls Club, but esports.
Yeah, esports of all things. How crazy!
Were you familiar with that at all?
I actually meet with Clint.
You do?
Daniel Booth.
Okay.
So
awesome.
we're talking about it. There's some projects actually going on here in Marion. Yeah. So we're quite excited.
So from the initial conception of the idea, did this just come together overnight, Noah? Or tell us a little bit about that process, because I think a lot of times, regardless of the business, a lot of folks have the idea and they think, oh, this is just gonna, we can open this up next month or whatever, and it's not that easy.
It's not that easy, and I'm guilty of that. I was very naive. Obviously, this was a few years back, so younger as well. So I get a little bit of leeway on that, I'd say. But when I started it and we kind of got a bare bones of the roadmap, what we wanted to do, I was like, we'll get approved on payment wise, like banking wise. This will be done in 4 to 6 months, no problem. And that 18 months later, we were still having headaches and hurdles. And really the core concept is, again, monetizing with real money, allowing people to compete for real money, and then obviously dispersing that money back to those people. And that was one of the biggest roadblocks we had, was we couldn't get anybody to process payments for us. So we're spending all this time, energy, money building the platform, and then we were focused on getting approved for payments, and we couldn't get approved. It's like the whole business is shot. If we can't process payments, there is no business. And that was a really big headache. And honestly, I'd say probably 2-3 times I highly considered just shutting it down because I didn't think we were going to be able to get approved. But
you eventually did.
Eventually did.
And didn't anticipate that roadblock.
No.
But you talked about an advisory board earlier. And a lot of those folks that you brought on have different areas of expertise that I'm sure have helped you to navigate some of those roadblocks along the way. So talk about that a little bit. Russ always asks about what kind of support system businesses have, because regardless of the business or the industry, having that support system around
The advisory
you
board is something that I don't think
is
we
really important.
dug into, so explain
Absolutely.
that too. Yeah.
Yeah, advisory boards, it was pretty new to me. I knew they had existed. I didn't know the structure, legality, everything like that. But ultimately, it actually started, you'd mentioned SBDC in Carbondale. It started there. I think, was it Robin Russell who used to be the director? Yeah,
Yes.
so Robin had introduced me to a former SIU alum, Ben Weinberger, his name. Had a very successful exit, great guy. Loved Ben, but she was the one that just happened to introduce me to him via email. Just said, he kind of advises, he may or may not, and that ultimately is what spawned the advisory board as a whole today. But, Ben had mentioned to me, step one, if I could go back and tell my younger self, I would form an advisory board sooner than later. And I kind of took that to heart, and we did. And, fast forward now, we have director of Take-Two Interactive, Grand Theft Auto publisher, president of music at Electronic Arts, former CEO of Vivendi Games, list goes on. And, these mentors and advisors, granted, they have a, equity position in the company, but, they truly were impressed by what we were doing, kind of shocked by what we were able to do by the little amount of capital we had. But they've been great in telling us, kind of steering the ship, so to speak, because, they've gone through it, they've seen it time and time again. And so for me, the most valuable thing isn't capital, revenue, anything, it's this knowledge, right? And they have this knowledge to where we don't have to make these mistakes. We can get it right the first time. We can expedite a roadmap. We can succeed.
And they are part of your legal corporation?
Correct.
They are built into that?
They are built into that, yes.
And who helped you through that process?
Yeah, so that was mainly one of my now advisors and investors, Mike Vorhaus. He's a consultant by trade, has his own consulting firm, also is on the board of dozens of publicly traded companies, but great guy all around, very nice. You would think he's from Southern Illinois. That's how nice he is, but lives in LA and Hollywood Hills. But great guy. But Mike was the one that really, pushed me for that. And he came in as an advisor without taking a position at first. He's like, here's what you need to do, talk to your attorneys. And the attorneys were ultimately the one that told me the structure, how it should be set up, vesting schedules, things like that, which for those who don't know, vesting schedule protects you. When you're forming these advisory boards, you're essentially giving these advisors ownership of your company in exchange for offering you, that knowledge, their time, that information.
Does the board also offer capital or no?
They can.
They can?
Yes,
Okay.
they can. It's recommended to try to get them to do both.
Yeah.
Anytime you bring on an advisor, I highly recommend try to get them to, give a little bit of capital as well.
Right.
Just because it incentivizes that much more to, perform. But yeah, that vesting schedule protects you as the owner of the business, because if you bring an advisor in, and let's say you give them a bunch of, shares or options to purchase shares in the future all up front, and they don't perform, well, you're kind of out of luck. They already got that, their share fully vested. And so you set up a vesting schedule that says, they get X amount this quarter, the next quarter, and this can be stretched over a year to 2 years is fairly common.
When did you launch the business?
We launched back in, I guess we started in 2020. I wouldn't say we actually launched until end of 2023, beginning 2024. Yeah.
And we mentioned early on, even before we started recording, that this is a pretty different conversation than we typically have with our guests on Small Town Big Business. They are usually either online companies or brick and mortars, traditional funding, that sort of thing. So when you talk about advisory boards, raising capital, venture capital, all of those things, did you know all of those pieces already? Was that, how did you learn that? Because it sounds very complicated.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, I don't think, but you definitely have to have your ducks in a row to do that.
Definitely have to have the ducks in a row. If you don't, it will be fast and quick and hard nose. And ultimately, when you're making that initial approach too, the reason you do want to have those ducks in a row is because if they do happen to say no, you could reapproach them in the future. If you come in and everything's kind of a mess, they're not even going to give you a second look. But from the venture capital side, raising money, advisory board, everything, legal structure, you need to be a C Corp, primarily Delaware C Corp. The reason for that is when you're a C Corp, there are shares in the company versus an LLC, which is a percentage of ownership. Just structurally, and also institutional investors, that's what they want. They won't invest in an LLC. They want a C Corp, again, primarily Delaware C Corp. And, it helps you too as a company, right? Because if I'm bringing in developers or sales staff or people, I can incentivize them too through shares or options to purchase shares in the future. And as an LLC, you can't do that. And so there's a lot of really unique tools you can do as a C Corp from a business strategy standpoint to not only raise capital, but also attract talent.
And have an attorney on speed dial to help you understand all of those pieces, right?
I need an attorney on speed dial, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Ask the right questions so you know which way
Yes.
to go, right? And you also mentioned, I know you've been part of different competitions and pitches and things like that, that even going in and giving the business pitch doesn't happen overnight. That takes numerous iterations of really identifying what that audience, whoever you're pitching to, wants to see and know. So you can talk a little bit about that, whether it's pitching for venture capital or a competition or just pitching your business to a customer. I think anyone can benefit from that process and how you went about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. The pitch again, same as the business, didn't happen overnight. Truthfully, didn't perform very well the first several iterations, I would say. Took a lot of hard work and tweaking, and again leaning on those mentors and advisors who have seen businesses, time and time again, so who can tell you like, do this, don't do that, this looks terrible, and ultimately help you just understand the business more, right? Mm-hmm. That's really what the pitch is. It's the core basics of your business. And if you can't really pitch your business in a, professional, quick, core manner, you're not going to be able to mm-hmm. raise venture capital. You're not going to be able to convince advisors to join. So everything kind of goes straight back mm-hmm. to the pitch.
And you mentioned the first few times didn't go very well. Did that surprise you? Because I think when we see a lot of entrepreneurs, they think, well, I'll just tell them what I'm doing, and of course they'll understand. Of course they'll get on board because this is a great idea, right? So, and that's not always the case. No. Because your perspective may be very different mm-hmm. than their perspective.
Yeah, not always the case. And again, it's about just getting to the core basics, right? And I learned this later on, less is more. Mm-hmm. For sure, less mm-hmm. is more. I remember my first iterations of the pitch, it's just all text, all nothing. I'm just talk, and they're mm-hmm. just like, you gotta shut up. Like, this is terrible. Like, yeah. Give me the headlines.
Because they'll ask the questions to follow up, right?
Yeah.
You can fill them in.
Correct.
You just don't tell everything up front.
Exactly. Yeah. Give them best advice I got actually again from the advisory board. Jeff Karp. He was former CMO, CFO of Zynga at one point, but he had told me, just key headlines. Like if you're reading the news, what's the headline? Do that for each of your slides when you're pitching. What's the business? How do you make money? How are you going to market it? Those key takeaways, just one quick sentence. Mm-hmm. And again, that took several iterations and failures as well. I participated in several pitch competitions and I didn't win.
But talk about the ones you did.
Well, yeah, the ones I did, those are good. I like to win those. We participated in Codify's first 50K pitch competition, so it was a $50,000 non-dilutive grant, and again, businesses would come, pitch their ideas, and the most sound businesses with the best pitches won that competition. And we fortunately happened to be one of those winners.
Awesome.
And we were able to relocate our business to either Cape Girardeau or Paducah, Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And we ended up deciding to relocate to Paducah, Kentucky for a year at their Sprocket location, which was great location, awesome incubator, good space, good group of people, and ultimately ended up connecting us with a state institution called Key Horse Capital.
Right.
And so we were able to get an institutional round of funding through them.
Right. Well, for the benefit of someone who runs the co-working spaces, tell us about Sprocket and tell us about what did you find, more details about why that was a great space for you.
Yeah, so Sprocket, again, small business incubator, everybody's very close together, co-working space. But Sprocket was really great because weekly they would have discussions with everybody there. Like, you could attend, it was free to attend. But again, it was just this knowledge sharing. Like, people had different marketing, campaigns going on and, legal and, setting up, say, an LLC versus C Corp. So it was just great to be able to share that knowledge pool and learn from others. And, they said, hey, I did X, Y, and Z on Facebook ads, for example, and that did not work. And it's like, oh, well, I won't do that then because it obviously doesn't perform. And so that was really what I valued the most was, again, just having this group of entrepreneurs who, again, they're all kind of in the same ship, right? They're building a business from the ground up. They're struggling, everybody's sharing those same pains.
And everybody at the weekly talk was people that occupied spaces there.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. And they would bring in different, mentors and advisors and some local business owners as well to speak.
Yeah.
But ultimately, for the most part, it was just everybody there that was in the co-working space. And it was great to learn from each other.
That's good. Question about that advisory board. So if I want to put together an advisory board, how do you recruit? Where did you find your folks?
Yeah, it catch-22. It's about your network. And so kind of a double-edged sword, if you will. If you don't have a big network, probably not going to be able to find a great advisory board, but it's all about just talking. Always talk to each other, talk to others. I mean, funny story, it's not even an advisor related, but one of my investors, he's on my cap table, used to be my former landlord, is now one of my largest investors.
Yeah.
So it's just because I happened to talk to him, I just caught him one day in his office. I was just like, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah. He's like, what do you do again? And I told him, and he's like, you should tell me more. And, that segued into something. And it's like, I could have just chose not to talk to him. And, none of that would have happened.
So it's a little bit like major fundraising, which is, I'm much more familiar with that. I mean, you work with your network.
Yeah.
You know, it's a relationship building. It's what you're doing, and then offering them an opportunity to invest in something that benefits more than just them, more than your organization. Yeah.
Correct. Again, it kind of snowballs, and you leverage, if you can get one in, leverage their network, right? So again, going back, Robin introduced me to Ben introduced me to Mike, and Mike knows everyone.
Yeah.
And truthfully, Mike Vorhaus is an absolute powerhouse on my advisory board because he basically, once he was in, he's kind of like the cat's meow, if you will, but like all these guys knew Mike, and they were like, Mike likes it, Mike's on your advisory board. I was like, yeah, and again, I don't know any of these guys.
Those people great,
yeah, and they're just like, oh, if Mike's doing it, we're in, and it's like that. But it's like, again, it was just that initial conversation with Robin, and then leads to Ben, and then leverage Ben's network to Mike, and leverage Mike's network. So again, if you don't make the ask or you don't talk, it's not going to happen.
That's really important for our listeners.
Really important, because I think you said early on, it all depends on your network. I don't think the key word is your network. It's who do you know, and then who do they know, and who do they know?
Yes.
Right? And then it just expands and expands from there.
Yeah, most definitely.
What other kind of resources made the biggest difference in your company and your growing the company? Certainly, as we said, it hasn't happened overnight, but it's really happened pretty quickly, but also took a lot of perseverance. Would you agree?
I would agree. Yeah, if you're not, again, it's a little cliche, I know, but it's like anything you do in life. If you're not passionate about it, you're going to kind of be miserable, right? You're going to wake up and kind of dread it. Like, I started gaming around the age of 4. I was semi-professional, age 13, 14. Like, I love games. I love gaming. Always was competitive, and so now I get to monetize games for real money. It's great. It's kind of a dream. It comes with its headaches and, again, struggles. And, why am I doing this? Those pop into my head still. But, ultimately, you got to be passionate about what you do, and if you're not, it's just not going to work, right? And like you said, it's happened quickly, but the resources that are most valuable are the ones you create. Again, the network, talking to others, and you have to do your own due diligence on things, right? Like, we got into NVIDIA's Inception program, which NVIDIA has an accelerator program that's kind of virtual, but, if you don't apply, you can't get in. And we didn't know about it, did our research, applied, got accepted, but then that progressed to us getting, over $100,000 in AWS server credits. So as we're building and scaling the company, we're not paying for servers. And it's that's great for a startup.
Makes a big difference.
Because the one thing you don't want to worry about while you're trying to build and make a business, profitable is how am I going to pay the bills?
Yeah.
So being able to do that additional research and due diligence and stuff and just, take a chance. Because if you don't apply and you don't do it, it's already a no, right? The worst case is it's going to be a no again.
Yeah.
And
So,
the NVIDIA Accelerator, was that the one that you were recently accepted to, or is that a different one that I'm thinking
The
of?
most recent one was actually one based in Chicago called Future Founders. We specifically got accepted into their fellowship program, which is for active scaling businesses. And so, again, similar to kind of like Sprocket and what Ethos is doing here, you're connected with people with ongoing legitimate businesses that are either growing, scaling, or just now getting established. In the fellowship program, what's nice is everybody is established and actively scaling. And so this is a virtual program that will last for a year, 2 in-person retreats, but we're getting connected with all these different businesses, different niches, and again, they're all actively growing and scaling. So
And a very competitive program, right? How many applicants and how many were selected?
Yeah, 18 were selected, and there were over 1,000 plus applicants on that.
And your company is one of the 18.
We are one of the 18.
That's
yes.
really exciting.
That is exciting. That's great.
Something to be proud of.
Yeah.
And really inspiring, too, that you continue. I'm kind of seeing this theme that you continue to not only grow the business, but expand that network, expand your knowledge. You're not just sort of sitting back and going, okay, now I know what to do. And you're just continuing to grab onto more and more knowledge. And I think that's a really great point, that we can never know it all. We have to tap into those other folks that have different pieces of that puzzle.
No, most definitely. And again, it kind of goes back to, I think, the most important thing in my business and what I would recommend to anybody that wants to, create their own company. And it obviously depends, LLC, C Corp, that's different. But if you're trying to grow and scale a large company and raise institutional money, you need to be that C Corp. But again, goes back to the advisory board. Those advisors, almost all of them have held huge roles in publicly traded companies, and they are some of the most humble people I've ever met, right? And they're the same as me, which is, it's the knowledge. They're talking to me and they're listening to what I have to say. I'm like, why are you listening to anything I have to say? Like, you know more than me, but, it's not the case all the time. And,
right.
They're always trying to learn more. And so I think, like you said, you can never stop learning. And if you think you know it all, that's when you're going to run into problems.
Yeah. Well, since we're called Small Town Big Business, right? Give someone some advice that, they've got innovative ideas, but they're like, I'm going to have to move to Chicago. I'm going to have to go to Nashville or, someplace else. Not, this is small town, right?
Yeah.
So what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I would say it doesn't, obviously there are benefits. I'm not going to say there's not, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, there are benefits to starting a business there. But ultimately, you're not going to have that community feeling as you would in a small town. You're not going to have the support group that you would in a small town, right? It was really locals here that ultimately started EWagers, right? They were friends of friends who, wrote some small checks initially that got our feet up off the ground. Doing that in a large city is quite difficult. And the competition, you have to, there are pros and cons to it, right? When you're in a big city, there are some really big people that, again, are leveraging their network when you don't have that network, most likely. And it's difficult to succeed when you have this small business and you're in a small community. Again, people kind of band together. They want to see you, make it. And, we wouldn't have got that in a large city. We just wouldn't have.
So you have other options, and you chose Southern Illinois. You chose to come back to Southern Illinois and operate your company.
Yes, we did.
We're glad you did.
Yeah, I'm glad I did too. I mean, another thing, Southern Illinois got great food too.
Yeah.
It is just as competitive as the big cities, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Very good.
So what's next with the company?
Yeah, current focus right now is just activating secured partnerships and scaling at this time. End of this year, we already have pre-approval for global expansion. We'll be approved in 23 plus countries. That's on the tail end of this year for the roadmap, but just focused on actively scaling at this time in the U.S.
Should I ask my final
Yeah,
question? First of all,
absolutely.
what have we missed? Have we missed anything, Noah? Anything that you want to touch on that we haven't asked about?
No, again, just in my personal opinion, if I could recommend anything to somebody starting out is, find a great group of mentors and advisors and, structure that to where everybody kind of plays a key role, right? We have advisors who specialize in capital raise, we have data scientists, we have corporate structure, legal advisors, B2B partnership, sales. So, you want to get somebody that can do basically everything. So if you run into an issue or a hurdle, you can call on somebody, right?
Yeah.
Like when we have marketing issues, we have the former CMO of DraftKings as an advisor.
Yeah.
So we call him up, when we have an issue with, say, on the data side, you call data scientist up. So, you can kind of pick and play. But that's the one thing I would recommend is getting an advisory board sooner than later.
Noah, do you ever have a down day? Because you seem like a very positive person. I'm thinking like there's a listener out there that's like, yeah, I'm not that positive,
Oh, I have a lot of down days. The one thing is it's a roller coaster. The highs are high and the lows are low.
So talk about managing that.
Yeah, it's difficult. In building the business and trying to juggle, burnout as well is also equally as difficult. Again, I think circling back, I think it all goes back to that passion, right? Like, why am I doing this? If you're doing this if the goal is to get rich, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Like, I wanted to do it because I was a competitive gamer and it was something I wanted, and I wanted to be able to offer it to other gamers. That's why I did it. It was a passion project of mine, and that's ultimately what got me through this, right? And as you get that support system too, it helps you along the way on those low days, right? You circle back, like, why am I doing it? Well, I'm doing it for the other gamers, doing it for the other competitive players, but I'm doing it for the mentors too. I'm doing it for, my investors, everybody, people that are supporting me. You can't let them down, right?
Yeah.
I think he just answered my
Answer
question.
your question.
My question is always, what is your why? And I will let you expand upon that in just a second, but I want to go back. I know we mentioned the advisory board a lot, but I think it's so important for this conversation because whether it's a formal advisory board like you've done, whether it's a team of mentors, whether it's a retail business down the street, I think having that team of people around you with those different areas of expertise, different knowledge, but also to help you see your blind spots, right? It's not a lot of yes people. It's people who are there to help guide the business, whether that's a yes or a no to the idea that you're proposing.
Yeah, correct. And that's another thing, you don't want a bunch of yes people because that's not going to help you.
Right.
And the nice thing about the advisory board that we have is they're pretty blunt. They're direct. And one thing you'll learn as you start off, or those who are starting off as a founder, you got to have some thick skin. That's for sure. You're going to get told a lot. You're going to get told some mean, nasty things, but it's ultimately to help you, like when I those first iterations of the pitch deck, show it to them. This is terrible. Why are you doing that? Like, do you know what you're doing? It's like, well, no, but thank you for pointing that out.
No, I don't know what I'm doing, but that's why you're here, to help me.
But again, it's, being able to take that information, tweak it, adjust, re-articulate, and, keep succeeding.
And now you know what you're doing.
Kind of.
Yeah, I would say yes.
I think
Yes,
you would.
do.
In fact, I'll be calling you.
Yes, you
Right. I mean,
I've seen it.
everything you said is part of the vision that we want to build out here.
Absolutely.
And so I'm actually going to be taking a lot of what you just said and bring it over to the other founder in this, the benefactor for this business. And so I'll be calling you. I'll call my attorney too, but I'll call you.
Yeah.
I'll get the advisory board on the other line too.
This has been a pleasure.
They'll be able to help you more.
So you already sort of answered what your why is, but anything you want to add to that? What is your why, Noah?
That's a great question. I mean, ultimately, it's going to come down to, I'm doing this for, Southern Illinois, right? Like that's why I came back here at the end of the day.
Yes, that's a value.
It's a value.
Yeah.
I love it here. And, you hear about, tech startups and big companies, a dime a dozen in San Francisco. It's not very often, Southern Illinois can hopefully maybe one day have, a large successful exit that can, ultimately benefit locals, again, local investors here, local supporters, local businesses at the end of the day, and that's really why we chose to come back here.
Yeah.
Noah Fulk, EWagers, where can people find you?
EWagers.gg, EWagers.bet, whole host of domains I could list, but just
search
search EWagers and you'll find us.
That's awesome. I think you mentioned your wife earlier, didn't you?
Yes.
Do you want to mention her name? Because I always like...
Yeah. Well, formerly Jessica Thornburg, but now Jessica Fulk.
Yeah.
She's been a rock star, big supporter of me day one, and she's made a lot of sacrifices along the way, so I appreciate everything she's done for me.
Yeah.
Go, Jessica, go.
There you go.
I'm glad we named her.
Yeah. Thanks, Noah. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, we want to thank everyone for watching and listening to the Small Town Big Business podcast. And we want to thank our sponsors for really caring about small businesses and entrepreneurs and supporting us. And thanks again to Arcadia Wealth Group, Banterra Bank, Black Diamond Harley Davidson and RV, Fowler Heating and Cooling, Southern Illinois Now, the Swinford Media Group, Union Street Arts, and the WAG Foundation, the Watermark Auto Group Foundation.
Very good. And again, you can find us on your favorite podcast platform. Over 100 episodes now. And don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We love sharing this information and all of these great stories, resources, tips, all the things with everyone. So again, I'm Deb Barnett with Southern Illinois Now. You can find us at southernillinoisnow.org.
And I'm Russell Williams, Director of Ethos at the Citadel. Please go to our website, ethosmarion.org, and join as a community member, which is free, but you'll get updates about what we do. Small business incubation, training and development for small business and nonprofit owners, and also the co-working spaces. Thanks for joining us.
Yep. Have a great day.